You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Suitability assessments are structured tools designed to evaluate whether Agile ways of working are appropriate for a given context. Their purpose is not to force a binary answer, but to provide evidence about where agility is likely to thrive, where practices will require tailoring, and what risks must be managed if agility is adopted. These assessments help organizations avoid blindly applying Agile methods to situations where they may not fit, such as projects with a movable scope or rigid compliance regimes. Instead, they surface conditions that either enable or hinder feedback-driven, iterative delivery. On the exam, suitability tool questions often test whether candidates understand that the value of these tools lies in guidance, not prescription. In practice, the assessments help teams make informed, transparent choices about tailoring Agile principles to context, improving adoption outcomes, and reducing delivery risk. Evaluation dimensions vary but typically include product uncertainty, stakeholder engagement, team capability, architecture and tooling, governance constraints, and organizational culture. Each dimension provides a lens for understanding whether Agile practices are likely to succeed. For instance, product uncertainty tests whether requirements are stable or evolving. Stakeholder engagement examines whether users are available to provide feedback regularly. Team capability measures skills in refinement, testing, and flow management. Architecture and tooling assess whether systems are modular and automated enough to support incremental delivery. Governance checks whether oversight aligns with iterative methods, and culture considers whether leadership values adaptability and transparency. On the exam, candidates may be tested on which dimensions matter most. The Agile answer usually emphasizes that suitability tools highlight multiple factors, since agility depends on the interplay of people, processes, technology, and governance, not on any single factor. High-fit indicators suggest that Agile methods are not only appropriate, but also likely to produce strong outcomes. These include evolving requirements where needs shift as discovery occurs, rapid learning needs that demand short feedback loops, modular architecture that allows incremental delivery, and accessible users who can provide frequent validation. Leadership openness to course correction and incremental value delivery further strengthens fit. For example, a digital product in a fast-moving consumer market with regular access to customer feedback is a strong candidate for Agile approaches. On the exam, high-fit indicators often appear in scenario questions about when Agile is most suitable. The correct Agile response usually emphasizes that agility thrives where uncertainty exists and where feedback and modular delivery can reduce risk. Suitability is highest where conditions align with Agile's philosophy of adaptability and empiricism. Low-fit indicators, by contrast, highlight contexts where Agile methods may struggle or require significant tailoring. These include rigid scope set by contractual or regulatory mandates, immovable delivery dates tied to external commitments, and tightly coupled legacy systems that resist modular slicing. Restricted access to users reduces the ability to validate assumptions quickly, while incentive structures that reward volume of output over outcomes discourage learning and adaptation. For example, a project delivering a one-time compliance report with no possibility of iteration is a poor fit for Agile methods. On the exam, low-fit indicators often underpin questions about when not to apply Agile blindly. The Agile response usually emphasizes that such conditions either call for tailoring Agile practices carefully or considering alternative approaches better aligned with the constraints. Low-fit indicators do not make agility impossible, but they highlight risks. Scoring models provide a structured way to interpret assessment results. Instead of binary yes or no judgments, scoring tools use scaled responses across dimensions and apply weights to reflect relative importance. For example, stakeholder access might carry more weight than tooling maturity, since feedback is essential to Agile learning. Weighted scoring allows nuanced results that highlight strengths and weaknesses without reducing them to an oversimplified label. This enables constructive discussions about where to invest in improvements. On the exam, scoring models may appear in questions about interpretation. The Agile response usually emphasizes that scoring highlights relative fit, not absolute suitability. What matters is how results are interpreted and acted upon. A well-designed scoring model supports transparent decision-making and encourages teams to see agility as a spectrum of suitability, rather than a binary condition. Triangulation is critical to reducing bias in assessments. Instead of relying on one function's perspective, suitability tools gather input from product, engineering, design, compliance, and operations. Each group offers different insights. Product teams know about stakeholder access. Engineers understand architecture and tooling. Compliance staff highlight regulatory risks, and operations staff know about support realities. By combining these perspectives, assessments avoid blind spots and prevent single-function bias. For example, a team may believe user access is strong, but compliance may reveal that legal restrictions severely limit engagement. On the exam, triangulation often appears in questions about reliability of assessments. The Agile response usually emphasizes that multiple perspectives improve accuracy and build shared understanding. Triangulation ensures that results are balanced and that tailoring decisions reflect the realities of the entire ecosystem, not just one view. Suitability tools are most powerful when used not just for baselining but also for trend analysis. Comparing initial results with later reassessments shows whether interventions improve agility conditions. For instance, a baseline may reveal weak team testing capability, prompting investment in automation and training. A reassessment 6 months later can confirm whether those investments improved fit. Tracking trends makes suitability tools part of continuous improvement, rather than a one-time diagnostic. On the exam, trend usage often appears in questions about ongoing adoption. The Agile response usually emphasizes reassessment and learning over static evaluation. Agile adoption is iterative itself, and suitability assessments should evolve as conditions change. Continuous tracking ensures that interventions are effective and that agility remains aligned with organizational context. Risk flags convert low assessment scores into actionable concerns. For example, a low score in product ownership signals that backlog clarity and prioritization may suffer. A weak score in test automation highlights quality risks and delayed feedback. By translating scores into specific impediments, risk flags prevent vague discussions and create clear areas for action. These flags can be prioritized in the backlog, ensuring that risks are tracked like other deliverables. On the exam, risk flag scenarios often test whether candidates can link low scores to practical implications. The Agile response usually emphasizes making impediments visible and actionable. Risk flags ensure that assessments do not sit idle as static documents but instead fuel focused improvements that raise agility over time. Suitability assessments must distinguish between readiness and suitability. Readiness describes whether a team has the skills and experience to use Agile practices effectively. Suitability describes whether the problem context itself is appropriate for Agile approaches. A team may be ready but face low-fit conditions, such as immovable scope. Conversely, a context may be suitable for Agile, but the team may lack readiness in skills like backlog refinement. Separating these concepts ensures that interventions are targeted appropriately. On the exam, readiness versus suitability often appears in scenario questions about adoption. The Agile response usually emphasizes that readiness is about capability, while suitability is about context. Both must be considered together to determine whether agility will succeed and how it should be tailored. Suitability assessments support decision frames about tailoring versus switching. When conditions show partial fit, teams must decide whether to adapt Agile practices to constraints or to use alternative approaches entirely. For example, a team working under rigid scope may still benefit from Agile delivery practices internally, but must adapt stakeholder engagement expectations. In extreme cases, switching to traditional project management methods may be more efficient. On the exam, tailoring versus switch decisions often test whether candidates can apply judgment rather than dogma. The Agile response usually emphasizes thoughtful adaptation based on evidence. Suitability tools highlight when tailoring is enough and when a different approach altogether is more responsible. This flexibility reinforces that agility is about delivering value, not enforcing rituals. Evidence standards ensure that assessment claims are backed by verifiable data. Assertions like, "users are available weekly," should be supported by actual calendars, access logs, or agreements, not optimistic intent. Without evidence, assessments risk producing misleading results. For example, assuming leadership is open to course correction without documented examples may overstate cultural fit. Requiring evidence fosters discipline and transparency. On the exam, evidence standard scenarios often test whether candidates recognize the importance of validation. The Agile response usually emphasizes grounding assessments in facts, not assumptions. Evidence standards prevent assessments from becoming aspirational wish lists and ensure that recommendations rest on verifiable reality. Interpretation cautions remind practitioners that suitability tools are not oracles. Surveys and scores provide signals, not absolute truths. Qualitative comments, interviews, and observations add essential context that raw numbers cannot capture. For example, a moderate score on stakeholder engagement may mask sharp differences between accessible users and unavailable executives. Without qualitative input, misinterpretation is likely. On the exam, caution scenarios often test whether candidates understand the limitations of surveys. The Agile response usually emphasizes combining scores with narrative interpretation. Agility depends on sense-making, not mechanistic application. Suitability tools provide structure, but human judgment remains critical for accurate interpretation and effective tailoring. Governance alignment ensures that assessment criteria map to organizational risk appetite and compliance needs. If assessments ignore these dimensions, their recommendations may be impractical or ignored. For example, advising full autonomy in a regulated financial domain may clash with governance expectations. Mapping suitability criteria to governance constraints ensures that recommendations are actionable. This also builds credibility with leadership who see that assessments respect organizational realities. On the exam, governance alignment often appears in questions about practicality of adoption. The Agile response usually emphasizes aligning recommendations with compliance and risk appetite. Suitability tools must be grounded in the governance landscape to be effective guides rather than idealized models. Documentation practices transform assessments into living references. Recording assumptions, thresholds, and owners for follow-ups ensures that results are not forgotten after initial discussions. For example, noting that test automation must reach a certain level by a specific date assigns clear accountability. Living documentation allows progress to be tracked and enables future reassessments. Without documentation, assessments risk becoming one-time gates with no lasting value. On the exam, documentation scenarios often test whether candidates understand the importance of traceability. The Agile response usually emphasizes recording results as part of continuous improvement. Documentation does not need to be heavy, but it must be purposeful, ensuring that assessments guide real change over time. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Tailoring from assessment results is one of the most valuable uses of suitability tools. Instead of applying a one-size-fits-all Agile framework, teams adjust cadence, artifacts, and roles based on what the assessment reveals. For example, if uncertainty is high, the cadence may include more discovery time, and acceptance criteria may be strengthened to capture learning goals. If stakeholders are only available monthly, reviews may need to be structured differently to maximize value during those interactions. Tailoring acknowledges that agility thrives on principles, not rigid conformity to practice. On the exam, Scenarios about fit assessments often test whether candidates understand that low scores are not automatic disqualifiers. The Agile answer usually emphasizes adapting practices to constraints while still upholding values. Tailoring ensures that assessments drive improvement rather than becoming blunt tools of enforcement. Capability uplift plans target areas of weakness uncovered by assessments, focusing on building team skill and maturity. For instance, if teams score poorly in backlog refinement, targeted coaching and pairing can improve clarity and prioritization. If testing capability is weak, training in automation or test-driven development builds confidence and speed. Capability uplift is not abstract. It is practical intervention tied to observed need. Over time, reassessment confirms whether these interventions improved fit. On the exam, capability uplift scenarios often test whether candidates can link low-fit areas to actionable growth. The Agile response usually emphasizes specific, targeted improvement rather than generic training. By connecting assessment results to uplift plans, organizations turn weaknesses into opportunities for deliberate, measurable growth. Architecture and tooling interventions address technical impediments to agility. Assessments may reveal tightly coupled systems, missing automation, or insufficient integration environments. Improvements such as modularizing components, implementing continuous integration, or adding automated regression tests enhance agility by reducing risk and enabling smaller batch sizes. For example, breaking a monolithic application into services allows teams to experiment with isolated features without destabilizing the whole system. On the exam, technical fit scenarios often test whether candidates can connect tooling and architecture improvements to better flow. The Agile response usually emphasizes investing in enablers that allow incremental delivery and feedback. Architecture and tooling are not side concerns. They are central to sustaining agility, and suitability assessments highlight where investments will yield the greatest leverage. Stakeholder engagement plans formalize access to users, decision-makers, and data, turning informal promises into scheduled commitments. For instance, if an assessment highlights weak user availability, the plan might secure monthly customer panels or formalize feedback sessions with product owners. These structured engagements prevent feedback loops from collapsing under delivery pressure. By creating explicit agreements, organizations move from intention to action, ensuring that learning opportunities are preserved. On the exam, engagement scenarios often test whether candidates can recognize the danger of informal or absent stakeholder involvement. The Agile response usually emphasizes formal, recurring touchpoints that sustain discovery. Engagement is not optional. It is the lifeline of iterative delivery, and assessments make gaps visible so they can be systematically addressed. Vendor and contracting adaptations align external partners to iterative delivery. Traditional contracts often emphasize fixed scope, but assessments may reveal misalignment with Agile flow. Adapting contracts to focus on outcomes, demonstrations, or capacity ensures that vendors integrate effectively. For example, a contract could require vendors to participate in sprint reviews or provide increments for demonstration rather than delivering in one large batch. Flexible change mechanisms allow learning to influence scope without costly renegotiation. On the exam, vendor scenarios often test whether candidates understand how third-party arrangements affect agility. The Agile response usually emphasizes aligning contracts to outcomes and cadence rather than treating vendors as detached entities. Suitability assessments surface these issues, enabling teams to bring vendors into the feedback loop rather than leaving them outside it. Compliance mapping integrates regulatory requirements into Agile cadence. Assessments often highlight gaps between regulatory evidence and iterative delivery practices. By identifying needed artifacts early, teams can align definition of done with compliance. For example, requiring traceability logs or audit-ready documentation as part of completion ensures that increments remain compliant. This approach prevents compliance from becoming a disruptive afterthought at the end of delivery. On the exam, compliance scenarios often test whether candidates can reconcile agility with regulation. The Agile response usually emphasizes embedding compliance into iterative flow. Suitability assessments show where gaps exist, enabling teams to build trust with regulators by demonstrating continuous, verifiable alignment rather than waiting for final stage validation. Flow policies stabilize delivery when assessments reveal overcommitment, variability, or bottlenecks. Work-in-process limits, explicit entry and exit criteria, and visual boards provide structure that improves predictability. For instance, limiting WIP ensures that teams finish work before starting new items, reducing thrash and cycle time variance. Entry criteria ensure that backlog items are sufficiently defined before work begins, while exit criteria ensure increments are truly done. These flow policies protect teams from the chaos of overextension. On the exam, flow policy scenarios often test whether candidates understand how to stabilize systems. The Agile response usually emphasizes limiting scope, clarifying readiness, and visualizing work. Suitability tools highlight where delivery systems drift into instability, making flow policies an essential corrective measure. Team composition changes often result from assessments that reveal missing skills, imbalanced workloads, or excessive handoffs. For example, if a team lacks test automation skills, adding a specialist or cross-training existing members can reduce dependencies. If handoffs between analysis, design, and development are causing delays, consolidating responsibilities within a cross-functional team improves flow. Rebalancing workload prevents burnout and creates resilience. On the exam, team structure scenarios often test whether candidates can connect assessment findings to practical adjustments. The Agile response usually emphasizes cross-functionality, balanced responsibility, and reducing handoffs. Suitability assessments make these needs visible, providing evidence to support composition changes that improve team health and delivery capacity. Governance adjustments replace heavyweight stage gates with incremental checkpoints. Assessments often reveal governance misalignment, where oversight mechanisms conflict with iterative flow. Instead of large approval events, governance can be restructured into smaller, more frequent checkpoints that evaluate value evidence, risk reduction, and compliance. For example, instead of waiting for a final design review, leadership may review learning outcomes at the end of each iteration. This approach satisfies governance needs while preserving agility. On the exam, governance scenarios often test whether candidates can balance compliance with iteration. The Agile response usually emphasizes incremental oversight aligned to cadence. Suitability assessments provide the evidence needed to redesign governance in ways that satisfy both risk appetite and adaptive delivery. Risk backlog creation transforms assessment findings into visible, managed work. Low-fit areas become backlog items with clear owners, due dates, and success measures. For instance, if test automation is missing, a backlog item might specify building an automated regression suite by a set date. By treating risks like deliverables, teams ensure they are tracked and resolved rather than ignored. Risk backlogs make improvement transparent and measurable. On the exam, backlog scenarios often test whether candidates can convert abstract risks into actionable items. The Agile response usually emphasizes visibility and ownership. Suitability assessments feed risk backlogs, turning observations into work that can be prioritized, funded, and delivered like any other backlog item. Reassessment cadence ensures that suitability assessments are not one-time gates but ongoing processes. Periodic checks quarterly, for example, reveal whether interventions are improving fit. Trigger-based reviews, such as leadership changes, major dependencies, or new regulatory requirements, ensure reassessment when conditions shift. This cadence keeps suitability tools relevant and prevents drift into outdated assumptions. On the exam, reassessment scenarios often test whether candidates recognize the need for continuous evaluation. The Agile response usually emphasizes building reassessment into governance rhythms. Agility itself is iterative, and suitability tools must evolve with context. By reassessing regularly, organizations keep alignment between practice and reality, ensuring agility remains fit for purpose. Communication packaging translates assessment insights into formats useful for different audiences. Executives need clear summaries that highlight recommendations, expected benefits, and commitments required. Teams need actionable details about specific gaps and how to address them. Packaging prevents insights from being lost in dense reports or technical jargon. For example, a dashboard showing fit scores and improvement actions helps executives see progress at a glance, while detailed action plans support teams. On the exam, communication scenarios often test whether candidates can convey assessment insights effectively. The Agile response usually emphasizes tailoring communication to audience needs. Suitability assessments only have value if their findings are understood and acted upon by both decision-makers and delivery teams. Comparative analysis across products or programs extends the utility of suitability tools. By comparing assessments, organizations can see where coaching or investment will yield the greatest risk reduction. For example, one program may struggle with stakeholder access, while another struggles with tooling. Comparing both allows leaders to allocate resources strategically. It also helps identify systemic issues, such as culture or governance, that affect multiple areas. On the exam, comparative analysis scenarios often test whether candidates understand how to prioritize interventions. The Agile response usually emphasizes allocating effort where improved fit reduces the most risk. Suitability tools thus provide not only local but also portfolio-level insights. Ethical use guidance reminds practitioners that assessments should not be weaponized to justify predetermined decisions. Their purpose is to create shared understanding, not to provide ammunition in political debates. For instance, scoring should not be manipulated to argue against Agile adoption when leaders already oppose it. Similarly, they should not be inflated to hide risks. Ethical use requires transparency, fairness, and constructive intent. On the exam, ethical scenarios often test whether candidates can distinguish between supportive and manipulative uses of assessments. The Agile response usually emphasizes that tools exist to inform, not dictate. Suitability assessments only build trust when applied ethically, supporting decisions through honest evidence rather than serving as tools for bias. In conclusion, suitability tools inform organizations about how Agile can be applied responsibly, highlighting both opportunities and risks. They support tailoring practices, uplifting capabilities, improving architecture and tooling, and aligning governance with iterative delivery. By turning findings into action through engagement plans, flow policies, team changes, and risk backlogs, organizations move from diagnosis to improvement. Reassessments, communication, and comparative analysis ensure that insights remain relevant and drive ongoing adaptation. Ethical application preserves trust and prevents misuse. On the exam, candidates will be tested on their ability to interpret suitability results and link them to practical adjustments. In practice, these tools reinforce that agility is not dogma but context-aware application, guided by evidence, tailored thoughtfully, and revisited continually. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.